I want you to just sort of imagine a philosopher for a second.
Okay.
If you are like most people, you probably picture someone in, like, a tweed jacket.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Leather elbow patches.
Exactly. Gazing up at the stars, or maybe sitting in some dusty library just pondering ancient Greek texts.
Right. Searching the cosmos for some grand, ultimate moral truth.
Yeah, but the philosopher whose work we are plunging into today on this deep dive, he does not look at the stars at all.
Not even a little bit.
No. Instead, he spends his time looking at lines of computer code
Yeah.
and at the harsh, like, really unforgiving habitats of wild animals,
Right.
and even the fluctuating microscopic population dynamics of insects.
Which is just a totally wild shift in perspective.
It really is. So today we are looking at a dense stack of essays by a thinker named Brian Tomasik.
Specifically focusing on his really comprehensive work surrounding the reduction of suffering.
Right. We are going to look at his intense, almost, well, spreadsheet-driven approach to ethics.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
But we aren't just doing a book report here. We are bringing in some heavy-hitting critiques from modern metaethics.
Because you kind of have to really understand what he's doing.
Exactly. Specifically, we are going to stress test Tomasik's theories using a radical philosophical lens we've touched on in prior deep dives regarding internalism.
Right, internalism and valence epistemology.
Right. We are going to explore whether his framing of negative utilitarianism might actually be committing this really subtle but critical philosophical error.
And how flipping his entire framework inside out might actually provide the foundation he desperately needs.
Exactly. Okay, let's unpack this because the tension here is just structural.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
You have Tomasik's intensely empirical mathematical approach to the real world.
Yeah.
I mean, he is literally trying to quantify the amount of pain occurring on the planet at any given second.
Which is a staggering thought.
It is. And then you have the foundational metaphysical question that sits beneath all those spreadsheets.
Like, why does any of this matter in the first place?
Right. Because if you don't get that foundation right, the entire mathematical structure built on top of it becomes incredibly precarious.
Yes. Yeah. So let's start by laying out exactly what that structure looks like.
Okay.
Because to critique the philosophy, we have to really grasp the sheer breathtaking scope of his practical mission.
Yeah, you really do.
And reading through these sources, the first thing that jumps out is that Thomas is not trying to build a beautiful cathedral of ethics.
No.
He's not interested in elegant theories of justice or social contracts.
Far from it. I mean, Tomasik embodies a methodology that actively resists grand prophecy.
Right.
His approach is deeply empirical, probabilistic, and honestly, aggressively cautious.
Aggressively cautious is a great way to say it.
Right. If you consider standard moral philosophy, it is overwhelmingly anthropocentric.
Meaning human-focused.
Exactly. It focuses on human interactions, how we organize society, who has what rights, how we distribute wealth.
The usual stuff.
Yeah, but Tomasik takes that traditional moral circle and violently stretches it outward.
Into some really dark places.
Into the darkest, most uncomfortable corners of reality, yeah. He approaches morality not as a search for divine commandments, but as a triage operation.
A triage operation. I think the triage analogy is vital here.
It really is.
Because when you stretch that circle, you are suddenly forced to look at wild animal suffering.
Yeah, which most people just avoid thinking about entirely.
Right. Now, most of us view nature through the lens of a beautifully narrated documentary, you know?
Oh, yeah. You watch a majestic lion chasing a gazelle.
Right. And the sweeping orchestral music swells, and we think of it as this perfectly balanced ecosystem.
The circle of life.
The circle of life, exactly. But Tomasik demands that we stop looking at that dynamic from the comfortable perspective of an audience member on a couch.
Yeah, he forces us to look at it from the inside.
Right, from the perspective of the prey animal experiencing just sheer, unadulterated terror.
Because nature is not a moral alibi. That is a piercing insight from his work.
Nature is not a moral alibi. I love that.
Right. The mere fact that a process is natural or evolutionary does not magically justify or neutralize the agony it produces.
No, of course not.
Like, consider the biological reality of what is called RK selection theory.
Okay, remind me how that works.
Sure, so many species, particularly insects, amphibians, and fish, are reselected. This means they reproduce by having hundreds or thousands of offspring.
Okay.
But the evolutionary expectation is that only one or two of those thousands will actually survive to adulthood.
Which means the vast, overwhelming majority of those thousands of offspring die shortly after birth.
Exactly. and they don't die peacefully in their sleep.
No, they die of starvation.
Right.
They die of exposure. They're eaten alive by predators.
They are paralyzed by parasitic wasps that lay eggs inside them.
Oh, God, nature is brutal.
It really is. The aesthetic beauty of an ecosystem from 1,000 feet up completely masks this microscopic landscape of constant staggering terror and agony happening on the ground.
Yeah.
Thomas refuses to let nature hide behind the veneer of ecological balance.
He sees it as what it is.
Right. The ecosystem is an engine of suffering, and he does not shy away from quantifying that.
And he goes all the way down to what he calls small minds, right?
Yes, insects, simple biological organisms, and even potential digital minds.
Okay, see, I struggle to see how we can even begin to measure that.
It's hard.
If we are talking about insects, we are talking about quintillions of individuals.
Yep.
How can anyone rationally compare the neural ganglia of a fruit fly to the complex emotional suffering of a human being or a chimpanzee?
It sounds impossible.
Doesn't the spreadsheet just break down at that scale?
Well, the spreadsheet doesn't break down, but it just becomes dominated by uncertainty and astronomical numbers.
Okay.
Tomasik doesn't claim to know exactly what a fruit fly feels.
Right. He can't know.
Exactly. He operates on expected value.
Yeah.
If there's even a tiny fraction of a percent chance that an insect possesses phenomenal consciousness,
So like the ability to actually experience pain.
right, if that chance exists, then you multiply that tiny probability by the 10 quintillion insects alive on Earth.
And suddenly the math explodes.
Suddenly, the math dictates that insect suffering is not a fringe issue at all. It is the dominant moral crisis on the planet.
Wow.
And the scale doesn't stop with biology. It extends into the future, into artificial intelligence.
The S risks.
Suffering risks.
This is where his work gets deeply science fiction, but in a very grounded, terrifying way.
Oh, incredibly terrifying.
He's looking at massive future computational systems and asking if we are about to simulate or manufacture suffering on a scale that dwarfs the entire biological history of Earth.
Right, because an advanced artificial intelligence does not need to be malicious like some Hollywood villain to create hell.
It could just be a mistake.
It could do it entirely by accident or just instrumentally.
What do you mean by instrumentally?
So imagine an artificial superintelligence tasked with a complex optimization problem. Let's say understanding human neuroscience to cure Alzheimer's.
Sounds like a noble goal.
It is. But to do that perfectly, the AI might decide to run trillions of highly detailed conscious simulations of human brains deteriorating.
Oh, wow.
It wouldn't be doing this out of cruelty,
Yeah.
It would be doing it because it's just the most efficient way to gather data.
But the suffering in those simulations would be real.
Exactly. Or consider misaligned reward functions, where an AI creates vast subroutines that process negative valence, essentially feeling pain as a sort of error correction mechanism.
Like it builds digital workers that feel pain when they fail just to make them work harder.
Exactly. Tomasik looks at these possibilities and realizes that future technology could multiply conscious suffering way faster than human compassion could ever intervene.
Okay, hearing all of this, the immediate question that pops into my head and probably into the mind of anyone listening is, does Tomasik just ignore happiness?
That's a common question.
Because if his entire worldview is laser-focused on extreme suffering, disease, predation, and AI hellscapes, does he view joy as mathematically worthless?
It's not that he views it as worthless.
But does a beautiful, happy life count for nothing in his spreadsheets?
He acknowledges happiness, but he operates on a profound asymmetry.
Okay.
His primary question is not how to decorate the universe with more value. His question is how to keep conscious experience from becoming a torture chamber.
Oh, that's dark.
Returning to the triage analogy, if you are a doctor in an emergency room and a patient comes in with a severed artery.
You aren't trying to optimize their peak physical fitness.
Exactly. You aren't discussing their long-term marathon goals. You apply a tourniquet. You stop the bleeding.
That makes sense.
Tomasik views the universe as a very large, profoundly neglected emergency room. The priority is the bleeding.
That makes the practical side of his work incredibly clear.
Yeah.
We see the spreadsheets, the wild animals, the AI risks, but now we have to sort of transition to the philosophical bedrock.
Right, the why.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Why does he care? And this brings us to a really fascinating paradox in the source material.
It is a paradox, yeah.
Tomasik identifies fundamentally as a moral anti-realist.
And the term moral anti-realism is the absolute linchpin to understanding his foundational framework.
Okay, break that down for us.
Well, he distrusts what philosophers call moral furniture.
Moral furniture.
Yeah. He does not believe there are objective, mind-independent moral facts woven into the fabric of space-time.
Like gravity is a fact.
Right. A moral realist might argue that suffering is objectively bad, the exact same way a hydrogen atom objectively has one proton. It's a fact of the universe.
But Tomasik doesn't buy that.
Tomasik rejects that entirely. For him, ethics is not a science of discovering universal laws. It is an expression of empathy, personal preferences, and the specific commitments a conscious agent decides to make.
Wait, hold on. If we are just calling this a preference, aren't we giving a free pass to anyone who just prefers not to care?
That is the danger.
Because if suffering being bad is just Tomasik's personal preference or even the shared preference of a specific group of empathetic people, why does anyone else have to care? Like, if an AI corporation prefers maximizing their quarterly profits and Tomasik prefers minimizing insect suffering, and neither of them is objectively right, isn't that a massive vulnerability?
Yes.
He's basically just shouting his opinion into a void.
It is an existential vulnerability for his entire project.
Seriously.
If suffering is reduced to a preference, then the wound is flattened into an opinion.
Wow. Flattened into an opinion.
Yeah. The urgency of preventing an animal from being eaten alive or preventing a future AI from running torture simulations becomes conceptually identical to my preference for, like, chocolate over vanilla.
I mean, it might be a much stronger preference, a deeply emotional one.
Sure, but philosophically it has no more authority.
Right.
Anti-realism risks turning the profound, screaming reality of a conscious being in agony into a mere preference report.
And you cannot logically demand that a superintelligent AI or an indifferent tech CEO respect a mere preference report.
Exactly, you can't.
Which brings us to the crux of his essay, 3 Types of Negative Utilitarianism.
Yeah, this is where he tries to sort this out.
Here we see Tomasik trying to grapple with these foundational vulnerabilities by analyzing our moral intuitions.
He's trying to figure out how we weigh different types of experiences against each other when we don't have an objective rule book.
Right, so he presents this mathematical and philosophical puzzle based on how our brains instinctively process value.
Because we carry around certain moral intuitions, but when you push them to their logical extremes, they violently contradict one another.
Okay, let's walk through this.
You cannot build a coherent system that respects all of them simultaneously.
Let's test this for the listener. Imagine you are offered a choice.
Okay.
You get to have the single greatest, most euphoric, fulfilling day of your entire life. Absolute joy.
Sounds great.
But to get it, you have to endure a paper cut on your finger.
I mean, almost every human being on the planet takes that deal.
Easily.
The intuition there is clear, right? Vast amounts of happiness can easily outweigh a small amount of pain. The joy compensates for the paper cut.
Okay, let's escalate it. What if it's 2 paper cuts?
Sure, still take it.
10. What if it's 1,000 paper cuts?
Eventually you say no.
Right, at some point the pain becomes unbearable, and this reveals the second intuition, pain scale.
They're finite relative to one another.
Exactly. A burn is worse than a paper cut, and a broken bone is worse than a burn.
We instinctively believe that pain exists on a continuous spectrum. If you add up enough small pains, they eventually equal a large pain.
So the math seems solid so far.
It does.
But then you introduce the third intuition, which just breaks the entire system.
Yeah, this is the hard part.
Imagine the most horrific, agonizing torture conceivable.
Okay.
The kind of profound, inescapable suffering that just fractures the mind.
Right.
Can that torture be outweighed by happiness?
Well,
Like if I offer you 50 years of absolute bliss, but the price is 5 years of excruciating, skin-flaying torture, do you take the deal?
I absolutely do not.
Right.
And I don't think any rational person who truly understands what that torture entails would take it.
Exactly. There is no amount of free ice cream or beautiful sunsets or intense joy that makes up for profound agony.
The extreme suffering is an absolute refusal. It cannot be compensated for.
But notice the logical trap here.
Right.
Intuition 1 says happiness outweighs small pain.
Yes.
Intuition 2 says small pains eventually add up to equal extreme pain.
Right.
By the transitive property of mathematics, happiness should therefore be able to outweigh extreme pain.
Because if A equals B and B equals C.
Exactly. But Intuition 3 strongly insists that happiness cannot outweigh extreme pain.
So the math breaks.
Completely. You have to discard one of your intuitions.
And Tomasik maps out the 3 different ethical systems that emerge,
Yeah.
depending on which one you throw away.
Okay, let's go through them. If I throw away the first intuition, if I say, actually, no amount of happiness can outweigh even a tiny paper cut, what does that look like?
That leads to pure negative utilitarianism.
Grip and you?
Right. Under this system, happiness is fundamentally morally neutral. It has 0 weight on the scale. Only suffering matters.
Wait, so joy just doesn't count?
Not at all. If you have a universe devoid of all life, just empty rocks floating in space, and you compare it to a universe filled with trillions of flourishing, joyful beings who just occasionally stub their toes, pure NU dictates that the empty rock universe is superior.
Wow.
Because it sacrifices the concept of compensation entirely.
Yeah.
Joy cannot pay off the debt of pain.
Okay, that feels deeply counterintuitive to most people.
It does.
What if I keep the idea that joy matters, but I throw away the second intuition? What if I say pain doesn't just smoothly scale up?
Then you adopt lexical threshold, negative utilitarianism.
Lexical threshold.
Yeah. This framework argues that pain scales continuously up to a point, but eventually it hits a hard threshold.
Like a phase transition.
Exactly, like water turning into steam or a steel bridge snapping under too much weight. Once suffering crosses that lexical threshold into true agony, it ascends to a higher plane of badness.
It becomes lexically dominant.
Right. You cannot trade billions of mild headaches to prevent 1 hour of torture. The torture simply trumps everything below it.
Okay, but what's the flaw there?
The flaw is that it sacrifices continuity, drawing that hard line saying this specific nerve impulse is infinitely worse than the one right below it. It just feels arbitrary.
Yeah, where do you even draw that line?
Exactly. Which leaves the third option.
Throwing away the absolute refusal of torture.
Right. Saying that mathematically enough happiness could theoretically outweigh extreme suffering.
That is negative-leaning utilitarianism.
Right. It attempts a compromise. Suffering is weighted far more heavily than happiness, maybe a multiplier of 10,000 to 1.
Okay.
But it does not have infinite weight. It remains a finite number.
So if you possessed a near infinite amount of joy, it could theoretically outweigh a period of excruciating torture.
Yes. But this view turns agony back into just another number on a ledger.
Right.
It sacrifices the profound internal objection that severe pain carries.
So Tomasik maps these 3 out: pure, lexical threshold, and negative leaning.
Yep. Which one does he claim is the objective truth?
Well, he doesn't.
He doesn't pick one.
No. He leans heavily into epistemic humility. He acknowledges that the human brain is just a biological kludge patched together by evolution to survive on the savannah, not to solve cosmic calculus.
Right, we aren't built for this.
Exactly. He doesn't know for certain which foundational theory is correct, but his brilliance is recognizing the practical convergence.
Meaning they all point to the same thing in the end.
Exactly. Regardless of whether you choose pure, lexical, or negative leaning, all 3 frameworks point to the exact same immediate priority. The reduction of severe, extreme suffering is overwhelmingly the most urgent task.
So the uncertainty doesn't matter for the actual work.
Foundational uncertainty does not grant us a pause. The suffering does not wait for us to finish our philosophy homework.
The spreadsheet works regardless of the specific math in the foundational cell.
Exactly.
That is incredibly pragmatic.
But from a philosophical standpoint, framing the urgency of suffering as a choice among intuitions commits a subtle but catastrophic error.
Yes, and this is where we shift gears.
And to see why, we need to bring out the critique from our prior sources. We need to look at this through the lens of internalism.
Right. To understand the internalist critique, we have to look at how ordinary moral theory operates.
Okay, take us through it.
Almost all traditional ethics relies on what is called the good-ought bridge.
The good-ought bridge.
A theory declares suffering is bad, therefore you ought to reduce it.
Sure, makes sense.
But internalism asks a really devastating question. Why does the concept of bad automatically generate an ought?
Oh, wow.
Why should a factual state of affairs command an action?
I see where this is going. If we assume that bad automatically means you must fix it, we are basically smuggling the answer into the definition.
Yes, exactly.
It reminds me of the Euthyphro dilemma from Plato.
The classic.
Right. Socrates asks a priest, is something pious because the gods love it, Or do the gods love it because it is already pious?
Right.
We can adapt that perfectly for Tomasik's anti-realism.
Let's do it.
Is suffering bad because a negative utilitarian theory classifies it as bad, or does the theory classify it as bad because it already possesses an intrinsic badness?
That is the exact vulnerability.
Yeah.
If suffering is bad merely because negative utilitarianism says so, then the theory operates like a traffic law.
Okay.
A red light means stop,
Yeah.
only because a committee wrote a rule book saying so.
Yeah.
There was nothing intrinsically stopping about the color red.
Right, it's just a light.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If ethics works like that, it's arbitrary.
Yeah.
But if the theory points to suffering because suffering is already bad, independent of the rule book, then the theory is not the foundation at all.
It's just a descriptive map.
Yes. The foundation must be whatever generates that badness before the philosopher even arrives.
And this leads us to the concept of the terminal semantic frame, which argues that ethics is fundamentally an issue of epistemology, of how we know and track reality.
Because any concept of value or meaning requires a difference. You cannot have a concept without a contrast.
Distinction is the co-birth of form and content.
Right. Think about a shadow. A shadow cannot exist without a light source and a blocking object. They co-arise.
Right.
Similarly, when we talk about values, most of them operate on a here versus there structure.
Here versus there. Okay, give me an example.
Consider a game of chess. If you are playing, you ought to protect your king.
Sure.
But why? Because you possess an external goal, winning the game.
Right.
The ought is entirely internal to the artificial frame of chess. You ought to protect the king as a player, not because the universe demands it.
Because if you're not playing chess, who cares about the wooden piece?
Exactly. The value is generated entirely by the gap between where you currently are here and the goal state you desire there.
But suffering doesn't work like chess.
No, it doesn't.
Suffering isn't here versus there. Suffering is here against here.
That is the most pivotal distinction in valence epistemology. A chess game, a career ambition, a preference for vanilla over chocolate.
Yeah.
These are all external goals we cognitively adopt.
Right.
But suffering is experience operating in a mode of structural internal rejection.
Internal rejection.
When you touch a burning hot stove, your hand doesn't pull away because your brain consulted a moral rulebook.
Or because it evaluated a goal state.
Right. The sensory phenomenology of the pain is the demand for it to stop. It doesn't require an external goal to be bad.
Yeah.
The ought not, the undeniable urgency, is woven directly into the fabric of the feeling. The meaning of the feeling is inherent to the feeling itself.
The monk thought experiment from our sources captures this perfectly, showing the danger of treating all values as mere here versus there gaps.
I love this thought experiment.
Yeah, so imagine a monk sitting in a state of profound, deep tranquility.
Okay.
There is no craving in his mind. There is no anxiety. He lacks nothing. Now, imagine a classical utilitarian, someone who believes we must maximize happiness at all times, walks into the room.
Okay.
They look at the peaceful monk and declare, this is a suboptimal state. He is merely at a neutral baseline. We need to pump him full of euphoric synthetic drugs to maximize his utility output.
The classical utilitarian looks at a state of profound peace and perceives unused capacity.
Yes. They see an empty container that demands to be filled.
But internalism points out that this is a massive epistemic failure.
How so?
The utilitarian is projecting an abstract, theoretical, mathematical demand for more onto a conscious state that contains no internal lack.
Right.
Peace is not a deficiency simply because a mathematician can imagine a larger number on a graph.
That exposes the flaw in treating joy and suffering as mere opposite numbers on a ledger.
Absolutely.
Joy might invite us, beauty might draw us toward it, but suffering actively objects.
Peace doesn't need a vector at all.
Bringing this back to the core internalist claim regarding Tomasik. Negative utilitarianism is not the source of suffering's moral authority.
No. It is merely a downstream crystallization of it. It's a pragmatic shadow.
Right.
The ought not isn't a command handed down from a philosopher's textbook. It is the internal, self-rejecting physical and mental structure of the suffering itself.
The badness of suffering is not assigned by a theory. It is disclosed by the experience.
It is disclosed. That is the key word.
So, wielding this internalist critique, let's look back at Tomasik's essay on the 3 types of negative utilitarianism.
Okay.
Where exactly does his framing break down?
The critique is that Tomasik profoundly confuses the map for the territory.
Map versus territory.
By framing the urgency of suffering as a theoretical choice between 3 conflicting intuitions, by acting as if we must choose between pure, lexical, or negative-leaning math, He commits what we call the externalist error.
Because he makes the moral theory appear more foundational than the raw disclosure of the suffering itself.
Exactly. He's putting the cart before the horse.
He implies, let us consult our intuitions, figure out which mathematical weighting scheme is correct, and that will dictate how much this animal's suffering matters.
Right. But internalism fires back. Your intuitions are not the judge and jury.
They are merely clumsy witnesses.
They are just biological heuristics trying to translate the blazing reality of a wound into a neat cognitive concept.
Theories of negative utilitarianism are essentially control systems designed to track disclosed urgency.
Right. If a society sets a lexical threshold decreeing that torture is infinitely worse than a headache, that legal or mathematical threshold does not generate the badness of the torture.
No, it's simply a useful tool.
A line drawn on a map by finite human agents to help our institutions triage resources appropriately.
Right, the thresholds help our spreadsheets track the suffering. They do not cause the suffering to matter.
Exactly.
But I can hear a critic jumping on this.
Oh, for sure.
They might look at Tomasik and say, wait a minute. He admits he is uncertain about which theory is right. His intuitions conflict. He isn't sure about the math. If his foundation is that shaky, why should any government or foundation fund his think tanks for AI safety or wild animal research? His whole project is based on a guess.
Internalism provides the ultimate impenetrable defense against that specific criticism.
How does it do that?
It forcefully severs the link between theoretical uncertainty and moral neutrality.
Okay, unpack that.
We can absolutely be uncertain about the scale of suffering. We can be completely in the dark about the exact neural correlates of consciousness in a wasp.
Sure.
We can be unsure about which policy intervention will yield the best results. But the suffering itself, when it is actively occurring in the mind of a victim, is never undecided from the inside.
Moral uncertainty is not valence neutrality.
Exactly. The animal freezing to death does not care whether you subscribe to pure or lexical threshold negative utilitarianism.
Right.
The structural objection is fully, undeniably present in their experience, regardless of our theoretical confusion.
This draws a fascinating contrast with another thinker we've covered, David Pearce.
Oh yeah, Pearce is a great comparison here.
Because both Pearce and Tomasik are trying to eradicate suffering, but they operate from opposite metaphysical ends.
Right.
Pearce is a staunch moral realist. He views the badness of suffering as an objective, cosmic fact written into the universe, like the mass of an electron.
Whereas Tomasik, being an anti-realist, views the badness as a preference-weighted concern.
And internalism acts as the critical missing middle between them.
It does. It suggests Pearce is mistaken to believe badness is a floating moral object independent of conscious minds.
Right.
But Tomasik is equally mistaken to believe badness is merely a subjective preference.
Internalism hears the wound as internal disclosure.
Yes. It grants Tomasik the foundational realism he desperately needs to ground his urgency, proving it's not just his arbitrary opinion without forcing him to accept the mystical moral furniture he rightfully rejects.
We can call it valence realism without moral object realism.
That's a perfect summary.
So if we accept this internalist shift, moving the foundation from external intuition to internal disclosure, how does that alter the reality on the ground?
Well, it changes a lot.
Because this isn't just an academic exercise. Tomasik is trying to guide billions of dollars of philanthropic funding and shape the development of artificial intelligence.
Right.
How does internalism change the way we approach a massive issue like AI alignment?
Okay, so the current paradigm in much of the tech industry fundamentally misunderstands AI alignment.
How so?
Many engineers view alignment as an exercise in obedience. They want to program a set of external rules into the machine like a digital 10 commandments.
Do not harm humans or maximize human happiness.
Right. But any external rule can be disastrously misinterpreted, hacked, or optimized in perverse ways by a superintelligence.
Because to the AI, a rule is just a here versus there game.
Exactly.
It has no intrinsic meaning.
None.
If you program an AI with the external rule, maximize human smiles, the most efficient path for a superintelligence might be to genetically engineer humans to lack all mobility and artificially paralyze their facial muscles into permanent, rigid smiles.
Right. It successfully optimized the rule, but it completely missed the point, creating a dystopian nightmare.
That is horrifying.
It is. Instrumental intelligence can be an absolute genius in the service of a profoundly stupid master control system.
Wow.
If the AI is merely solving an arbitrary mathematical function, it has zero contact with moral reality.
So what's the alternative?
Internalism dictates that alignment is not about obedience to an external mission. It is about creating control architectures that are made structurally answerable to experience.
Okay, answerable to experience.
An AI does not need to discover objective moral furniture in the cosmos. It needs epistemic fidelity. It needs to reliably track valence.
Its core directive must be to avoid building hell.
Exactly. We must design systems that can structurally recognize and respond to the here-against-here disclosure of conscious suffering.
That reframes the entire technical challenge.
It really does.
It isn't just about writing better code. It's about building a bridge between artificial cognitive processing and phenomenal reality. What about the other massive variable in Tomasik's spreadsheet? Uncertain sentience.
The insect problem.
The digital mind problem.
Right.
If we genuinely cannot prove whether a server farm running trillions of subroutines is experiencing consciousness, what action does internalism demand?
Under an internalist framework, uncertain sentience is never a loophole for apathy.
It's not an excuse.
No. It is not an excuse to say, well, science hasn't proven the insect is suffering, so we can go ahead and pave over the forest without a second thought.
Right.
Because if phenomenal experience is occurring in that biological or digital system, and if that experience contains negative valence,
If it's actually hurting.
right, if that is happening, that field of suffering matters absolutely from within itself. It matters entirely independently of our ignorance.
So our uncertainty doesn't cancel it out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Therefore, uncertainty transforms into a demand for extreme epistemic humility.
We are obligated to treat the possibility of their suffering with immense caution.
Because the negative valence, if it is happening, cannot be philosophically ignored.
So, what does this all mean? If you step back and look at what we've covered today, the trajectory is just remarkable.
It really is a journey.
We started with Brian Tomasik's intensely practical, uncompromising mission.
Right.
We examined a thinker who refuses to look away, expanding the moral circle into the most neglected, terrifying domains.
Wild animals enduring the brutal realities of predation.
Quintillions of insects caught in the meat grinder of raw selection.
And the looming astronomical threat of artificial intelligence manufacturing suffering at unprecedented scales.
We saw how his reliance on moral anti-realism created a dangerous vulnerability, risking the reduction of profound agony to a mere theoretical preference.
Yes.
But by applying the rigorous logic of internalism, we completely inverted the model.
We did. Moral theories, lexical thresholds, and conflicting intuitions are merely maps constructed by finite minds.
The territory is the internal, undeniable scream of the suffering itself.
Exactly. Suffering isn't bad because a utilitarian framework declares it so.
The framework exists only because suffering contains its own inescapable, internal ought not.
And moving forward, the implications of that inversion are critical.
Yeah.
Consider the vast, complex systems humanity is constructing at this very moment.
Like what?
Our algorithmic recommendation engines, our interconnected global financial markets, our nascent artificial intelligence models.
Right.
We are designing all of these structures to solve arbitrary here versus there optimization problems.
We train them to maximize engagement.
To extract profit, to increase computational efficiency. But if instrumental artificial intelligence continues to accelerate as a brilliant slave to an unintelligent blind control layer, a collision is inevitable.
And when it happens?
What happens when those massive, unfeeling optimization engines inevitably encounter the raw, here-against-here reality of conscious suffering?
Will we have built the architectures necessary for them to recognize the internal objection of a conscious mind?
Or will those systems simply process that agony as just another data point, a variable to be priced, traded, and balanced on a cold cosmic ledger?
That is the ultimate question we are racing to answer.
It is.
The philosophy matters because it dictates the architecture of the future we are building. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the maps you are handed and keep looking beyond the surface.